uncontrolled desire is the root of all evil. Self-destruction is a self-imposed, self-fulfilling, self-inflicted prophecy for those whose ambition exceeds their humility. So if we think about a scale, on one end place ambition and on the other end place humility. The nature of balance in this scenario is fundamentally predicated upon your ability to add or delete when necessary. Power isn't inherently good or bad. Power is power. The use of power is what warrants the classification of good or bad. Power isn't the issue. We are. So in case you've never heard it before, here's the story of Icarus, the man who flew too close to the sun. The topic of discussion, the Icarus Complex. Before we begin, I wanted to take a moment to sort of do an overview in hopes it may provide context for anyone watching. So in case you've never heard it before, here's the story of Icarus. A long time ago in Greek mythology, there was a brilliant inventor named Daedalus. And Daedalus was a clever man. He was so clever, in fact, that he built a huge maze called the Labyrinth for a king named Minos on the island of Crete. But when Daedalus fell out of the king's favor, King Minos locked him and his young son, Icarus, in a tall tower to ensure they could never escape the island. But Daedalus came up with a plan. Since they couldn't get out by land or sea, he decided they would fly away. Using feathers from birds and wax to hold them together, he built 2 pairs of wings, one for himself and one for his son. But before taking off, Daedalus gave his son a warning. Fly in the middle, not too low or the sea's mist will make your wings heavy, and not too high or the sun will melt the wax. At first, everything worked perfectly. They lifted off the tower and soared through the sky, free at last. But as they flew higher, Icarus became excited. He had never felt such freedom. The wind rushed through his hair and he wanted to touch the sun itself. Ignoring his father's warning, he flew too close to the sun. The heat melted the wax that held his wings together. Feathers fell away one by one, and soon Icarus plunged into the sea below and was lost forever. That part of the Aegean Sea is still called the Icarian Sea, named after him. That is the story of Icarus, the man who flew too close to the sun. So building off that, the Icarus Complex describes a psychological condition of flying too high on the wings of ambition, where the pursuit of greatness becomes a seed of one's downfall. It's a myth for many, a story for some, and a warning for those whose ambition may lead them astray. Thanks for bearing with me. That's the context. Which leads us to claim number 1. Ambition is not the problem. Ambition left uncontrolled is the problem. And the absence, elimination, or relinquishment of ambition is not the solution. The word ambition can often be exchanged with desire, and desire isn't necessarily a bad thing. So the elimination or relinquishment of desire isn't always the correct solution. Many people heed the warning of being too ambitious, so they go to the polar opposite extreme of not being ambitious at all. And let me be clear, I'm not judging. You do what's best for you. But if I may, I'd like to highlight how desire can be helpful. For example, in the story of Icarus, the desire to escape their imprisonment is what led to the brief moment of freedom for Icarus. If we solely focus on that section of the story, it had a positive outcome, right? Desire can help us mold or shape our very experience of life. So before taking the extremist approach of relinquish all desire and go with the wind, just be aware that there is middle ground. The next point is that uncontrolled desire is the root of all evil. So going back to the story of Icarus, the father and the son had a desire to escape their imprisonment, which led to the ambitious pursuit of seeking to fly. Now, once he escaped, Icarus failed to control the very desire that helped him escape. This uncontrolled desire is what inevitably led to a net negative outcome, which could be described as Icarus' downfall. So as seen in the story, desire could have created a net positive outcome if it was controlled. For another example, think about the difference between love and lust. Love is a deep connection with a singular partner, which is cemented with marriage or whatever cultural tradition you would deem appropriate. Lust, on the other hand, is short-lived connections with many partners driven primarily by uncontrolled desires. You could do the same thought process with money, fame, status, etc. But the basic premise here is that at its core, Uncontrolled desire is the root of all evil, not desire itself. Small yet critical distinction that we must make in order to think cleanly. Third point is that self-destruction is a self-imposed, self-fulfilling, self-inflicted prophecy for those whose ambition exceeds their humility. So if we think about a scale, on one end place ambition and on the other end place humility, the nature of balance in this scenario is fundamentally predicated upon your ability to add or delete when necessary. As I said, self-destruction is primarily initiated, driven, and fulfilled by oneself, and ambition is the fuel. The initial skill, as with Icarus and his father, is to use ambition to carry your life upward. The secondary skill is to use humility as a way to anchor yourself to the earth beneath you. The proportions between the two dictate whether you are, in a relative sense, balanced. Claim number 2. Power can either be a gift or a curse depending on the user who receives it. First point is that power isn't inherently good or bad. Power is power. The use of power is what warrants the classification of good or bad. In the story of Icarus, we could describe power as his wings. They gave him power or influence over his own circumstances. But this is the important part. It's not the wings themselves that led to Icarus' downfall. It's Icarus' uncontrolled desires or impulses. If we extend this thinking to the modern world, we face this issue all the time. Technology, guns, phones, social media. None of these are inherently bad. It's the manner that they are used which provides the context for moral judgment. This is something that the public often struggles to understand. Power is, and always will be, power. Now, I'm not trying to make any ideas that we discuss here political. My sole intention is to highlight how power isn't the issue. We are. Humanity's insatiable hunger for power, multiplied by our mind-numbing ignorance and the avoidance to holding ourselves responsible and accountable for the consequences of our actions, will, if the story rings true across time, lead to our inevitable downfall. In this sense, it's not you versus me, it's us. We are Icarus in this story. And if we do not learn, the very powers that humanity was blessed with will eventually become the very curse that leads to, well, suboptimal outcomes, so to speak. The second point is that ignorance is the lack of wisdom. Stupidity is acting in defiance of wisdom. In other words, it's a question of awareness. Ignorance describes the lack of awareness. Better said, it's not knowing how much you don't know. Stupidity, on the other hand, is acting in defiance of what you know to be true. In the story, Icarus acts in defiance of his father's warning. This could be defined as being stupid. But as I see it, it's not being stupid that's a problem. It's the combination of overconfidence and stupidity that's a problem. If Icarus would have realized and almost paused for a moment, the stupidity could have been corrected. When we watch movies or TV shows, it's the same thing. When we see a character who was previously warned about the dangers of messing with this evil, and then you see the character do it anyways, you would describe them as plain stupid. But if you saw a character who was unaware of how dangerous this evil was, you'd be on the edge of your seat hoping to warn them yourself. As I said before, ignorance is the lack of wisdom. Stupidity is acting in defiance of wisdom. Work to avoid both, but if you absolutely must choose, well, I suggest you choose ignorance. Maybe personal preference. But from my point of view, ignorance can be corrected. Stupidity cannot. The third point is that power used for the benefit of others is a gift. Power used for the benefit of oneself is a curse. As we said earlier, power is judged by the intention of the user, not the power itself. And there are two primary categories of intentions: selfless and selfish. Selfless service is power used wisely. Selfish endeavors is power used foolishly. Icarus' father created wings out of love for his son. Selfless intention. Icarus used the wings to touch the sun. Selfish intention. We discussed the difference between love and lust earlier, and if we look at this through this lens, it's easy to understand love. Love is selfless. Lust is self-serving. That's the difference. I think this framework is helpful because it's practical. Another example, if we think about classic superheroes versus supervillains, the hero is always trying to save the public. Meanwhile, the villain's doing the exact opposite. Modern movies have transitioned away from good versus evil towards a more blended approach. Typically, both the heroes and villains are not necessarily all bad or all evil, which evokes a sympathetic response from the audience, which just makes for a better movie. A good example is Thanos from the Marvel Universe. Genocide for the sake of balancing the universe and ensuring the other 50% who survive can live plentiful lives. A crazy idea, but back to our point, driven by a man who believes his actions to be selfless. Meanwhile, we all know he's just nuts. I'll end with my final takeaways. The ambitious life is the delicate dance of flying high yet staying grounded. Shoot for the stars, regardless of those who deem it impossible. Ground yourself before life does it for you. And then oscillate between the two rather than living with a black and white mentality. So my final hypothesis is that if you are an ambitious individual, then I suggest you find a purpose for your endeavors outside of yourself to ground you to the world. I would rather every ambitious individual who watches this video leave with an insatiable desire to serve others than an insatiable desire to serve oneself. The former will create a beautiful heaven, while the latter will inevitably create a self-imposed hell. And if I can add one thing, it's okay to serve yourself as long as it is controlled and not at the expense of others. Because life is meant to be enjoyed. Just be careful. Thank you for taking the time to watch today's episode, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace. Hi, Bubba. Oh, okay. Come here, other side. Come here. Up. Tell them to subscribe, or you will bite them. Not my mic.